What's the worst example of bad parenting you've ever witnessed? A mother let her kid play in the stream of wood chips coming out of a wood chipper and yelled at the guy who was cutting down trees because he told the kid to get away from it. She was on her phone the whole time. There could have been nails and stones in that wood that could have hit the kid, but nope, it was the bloke's fault for chipping wood and not letting the kid play in it. I went to breakfast with a good friend and a friend of a friend. We pick up the friend of a friend who brings her 3-year-old son along. The kid is crying and making all kinds of noise. The mother responds by telling the kid that I have a gun, and if he doesn't calm down I was going to shoot the kid. First hand account, my mom would let me work during the summer from 7 to 7, and when I came back to the hotel room she'd pay for another night, get me a MC chicken, and then shoot up heroin while I watched TV. Edit, did not expect to come back to this. This happened many years ago, when I was about 10 or so. My mom's ex-friend. We'll call her Patty for the sake of this story. Well, one day, there's a knock at the door and mom goes and opens it to find Patty's son John, also not his real name, who was only about 5 years old at the time. His mom is sitting in the car in our driveway and has just standing there by himself. My mom says, "Hey there John, what brings you guys here today?" Little John then replies, "Mom said to ask if you have a can." Mom says, "A can? Like a soda can?" John says, "I dunno. She said she needs a can so she can smoke her crack." My mom, who was most certainly not any sort of angel herself, fumes with anger over this. She says, "John, go inside and play with me. Close the door and don't look outside." So John comes in, and I put some cartoons on for him to watch. I then peek out the window whilst he is occupied with the show. My mom is screaming at Patty through her open car window. I couldn't hear what was being said, but they were both screaming at each other. And then my mom punches Patty in the face through the open window, pulls open her door, drags her out of the car onto the drive-away pavement by her hair and beats the ever-living sin out of the woman. After she finally lets Patty go, Patty gets up, gets into her car, and drives away, with her son still in our house. Luckily, my mom was friends with Patty's brother-in-law, which is how we knew her in the first place, and she called him, who in turn called the kid's grandpa, since he himself was at work, to come and pick him up. Grandpa apologized profusely for Patty's behavior and took John home with him. I've seen parents lock their 2 children in their bedroom so they could play WoW. Anytime the kids came out and did anything kids normally do, they were immediately sent to their room. The lock was changed, so it was on the outside. The most disturbing thing I saw firsthand was unlocking the door and nearly puking from a foul smell. They shoot themselves and threw it into the ceiling fan. Shit was everywhere. Child Services was contacted not long after. Edit, yes, shoot hit the fan and the fan further liquefied said shoot and slung it onto everything. Their hands were covered in it, and they were using it to finger paint on the walls as well. I still have no idea how long it took them to clean it all up. My sister was worried that her 7-year-old son wasn't at the level as the other kids and considered holding him back a year. She didn't end up going through with it, but my brother-in-law found this development super funny and kept openly mocking his own son until his own son starting crying his eyes out and needing a hug. I was absolutely horrified that his own father was acting like a schoolyard bully. I'm a prosecutor, so I've seen a lot of really terrible parenting. Once we were investigating a man for sexually assaulting his girlfriend's 14-year-old daughter. The girl was interviewed and disclosed that he had, in fact, been having sex with her. The detective went and told her mother what she had disclosed, and mom's response was, "So you're telling me she's gone from being my daughter to being my competition?" Edit, of course a 14-year-old can't consent to have sex with adult. That's why we were involved. I didn't mean to offend anyone by not using the word grape. We had a girl in our foster care program whose father used to get mad because she would throw up when he would grape her. He fixed this problem by handcuffing her to the toilet when he did it. We had another kid that was incredibly good at making paper airplanes. Like he could make one and tell you how far it would go, which way it would turn, how many flips it would make, etc. before he ever threw it. I asked him one day how he learned, and he said, whenever my parents abused me, I would just go to my room and make paper airplanes. That kid made a lot of freaking airplanes. Turns out he was one of the worst abuse cases RDHS had ever encountered in the county he was from. I could go on for quite a while. Hard to pick just one. I was driving along my street when this 4 to 6 years old kid rolls out of a driveway on a tricycle. I come to a stop and wait for him to get out of my way as he seemed to be doing. His mother runs down the driveway and just starts screaming at me rather than get her kid out of the road. Another car comes up behind and without waiting just goes around, clipping the kid's tricycle, knocking him on the ground, and the lady just screams at me even more. She wouldn't stop or get out of the way. I finally just held my horn down till she gathered her kid up and got out of the way. Some people are really messed up when it comes to accepting responsibility. I was following a car through town one day and we were coming up on a green light. The property on the corner lot we were driving past had large stone fences, so you couldn't see cars coming in the cross street. Well, all of a sudden when the car in front of me is like 20 feet from the intersection, a cyclist rides through his red light right out into the intersection. I'm thinking this guy's fricked, but the car in front of me reacts instantly and slams in his brakes and manages to swerve around the back end of the cyclist's bike. After the commotion we both make it through the green and get stopped at the next intersection. The cyclist sees this, changes course and pedals fast to get up to the car in front of me. He starts punching the car's window and spitting on it and kicks the door and the rides off. It was surreal. He made a huge mistake by running a red, and the only reason he wasn't seriously hurt was because of the good driving done by the guy I was following. So naturally he proceeds to try and assault the guy. That saved him months of recovery. I work at a fast food restaurant, and while what I see probably isn't what most people would consider the worst, I still see quite a bit of bad shit going on. A lot of loud, emotionally abusive parents yelling at kids, kids that look dirty, kids without proper clothing in bad weather, just everything. Was a truck driver once in my life. Saw two parents on the road with a crying child maybe 8 years old in the back. They each took turns shooting up heroin. I'm a teacher. The examples of bad parenting I could give are staggering. The worst examples end up with me calling Child Protective Services. Like the child who talked about naked family time, or the 14-year-old who left school to play, designated driver for drunk parent, or any number of other things. Day-to-day normal bad though is any parent who talks shit in front of their child. I don't care who you're bad-mouthing. Don't do it in front of your child. All that comes to school. All of it. Edit. For clarification, the naked family time was from a girl in 5th grade, and there was more to the story. It sent up enough red flags that I contacted CPS. She ended up being removed from the home. I worked as a cover supervisor in a school for a couple of years, and the crap I experienced was insane. I work with 13 to 19-year-olds, so they already had enough issues managing normal everyday teenage struggles, but the things some of the parents did to add to their burdens was disgusting. I ended up leaving to work with adult learners, mainly because my degree is in a subject not taught at school level, but it was a relief in a way, not having to watch these kids suffer. I still lose sleep worrying about some of them. Teachers are so underappreciated, and no one seems to consider what you see and have to deal with. Well done for being a protective influence for those kids. An irate mother of a girl in a private school's music program made a big scene in front of the faculty and students because her daughter had not been selected to sing a solo in a school concert. The student had been very clear to the faculty that she didn't want the part, nor was her voice suited for it. Still, her overbearing mother insisted that she audition against her will. As a result, the girl was yanked out of the school she loved by her parents and embarrassed, all because the mother's ego required that her daughter be the shining star in front of others. A little while ago in a supermarket in London, a young girl was screaming at the cashier for asking for ID for the large bottle of vodka she was buying. As the cashier continued to ask for ID, the girl opened her coat to reveal a large swollen belly and shouted, "Of course I'm old enough to drink vodka, I'm freaking pregnant." My mother's mother was a pretty shooty one. She wouldn't let her go to school because she wanted her to become a housewife. She let her boyfriend sexually abuse my mother when she was little and seduced my mother's boyfriends. Lived under some horrible people for 8 months. They would have parties in the middle of the week till 2 or 3 AM regularly. But one particular disturbing story, their girl around 10 to 12 was having regular night terrors. She would wake up screaming. We lived in the basement, their bedrooms were on the 2nd floor, so a whole story between us, and we could hear the dad stomping down the hallway and slam open the door and start screaming at the top of his lungs, "You better freaking knock that shit off. Stop crying, you shoothead. Fear nothing but freaking dreams. You hear me, dreams. It's nothing worth crying over." Worst neighbors ever. We never felt sorry that our dog barked all day. He hated them. When their kids started crying, our dog started to cry and whine and howl in sympathy. But the adults he would bark and snarl at loved people of all ages. That dog. I could trust his instincts of a good human. I know downright tragic examples of horrifying parenting, but fear such downers. I'll go with a story which has more of a slightly humorous element to it. I'm at a red light in the right hand lane. Right hand turns on red are legal where I'm, there's a car coming, but it's a ways away. I turn right and cross into the left hand lane as the incoming car was driving in the right hand lane, and I didn't want to have to accelerate too fast. The upcoming car slows down to my speed. Woman hangs out of the driver's side window with a beer in one hand, fats on the wheel and a cigarette in the other as she's flipping me off, and says, "Be careful, motherfricker. I've got kids in the back." Then she sped off well above the speed limit. A woman on the bus told her approximately 6-year-old son to tell an approximately 11-year-old schoolgirl to move out the way, but referred to the girl as that fat cow. I lost my shoot, probably displaying pretty bad parenting skills myself as I was taking my son to school, but I couldn't let it pass. Frick, here we go. Not my story, but my mom. Since she's a school teacher, kid came in with a huge ass rash in my mother's class. She thought it was herpes. Asked if he felt fine, and he replied that he had a really painful throat. Oozing rash all over the kid's face. My mother rushed him to the nurse and the nurse freaked out. Turns out the kid had such a severe case of strep throat he had infection oozing from his skin. They called his parents and all the parent had to say was, "We already took him to the doctor and we don't want to drive him back, he'll be fine." My mom reported it to child services and tried giving the kid some salt water. She feels so bad, but legally she can't do much other than that. My mom felt horrible for him. Edit. Changed huge ass rash to huge ass rash. It is not an ass rash, but rather a huge ass facial rash. I met a girl in college who had lived with her aunt for a few years after her parents had died, and the aunt literally tortured her. She told me about how she would be kept chained to the AC unit and starved. She still had trouble gaining weight and growing hair when I met her because the malnutrition had gotten so bad over time. That people do shoot like this to each other pisses me off to no end. I knew a girl in school whose mother had done that to her and her sister when the dad was out of town on business, which was very often. They'd be locked in their room without food or water for literally days, and the mom would feed them shortly before the dad would be coming home. He couldn't figure out why they were so skinny, acting so strangely, and peeing in the closet and stuff. He thought his kids were like super messed up. They were just too terrified of the mother to tell the dad what was going on. The girls eventually started trying to break out of the room and the mom started tying them to their beds. Eventually the dad learned the truth and happy ending. The mother hasn't seen them since. I just can't understand treating someone that way, especially your own kids. I was traveling through India. I don't speak Hindi, so I didn't understand what was being said or happening, but some old lady turned round to a very passive little 5 or maybe 6 years old and then slapped her across the face with all her force. It was heartbreaking. The kid just sobbed. She didn't even scream. I think she must have been used to it. This like 5-year-old kid emptied a 4-pint bottle of milk all over floor at supermarket where I worked, and her mum just stood there and watched. To add to that, the child managed to place the empty bottle in the center of this now 2 meters wide puddle, and the mum just looked at me and said, "You've got some cleaning up to do." Unbelievably rude. Here in Belgium, new parents receive money from the government at the birth of each kid to help with the initial costs like diapers, baby bottles, strollers, etc. It's about $2,000 a kid, if I'm not mistaken. Well, I knew a guy who decided to have a kid because he needed the money to buy a new computer to play games the whole day, obviously. At a movie theater, sitting in the 4th or 5th row with friends. This was a rated R movie. 2 kids, maybe 4 and 7-year-old, are in the audience. They start playing and running back and forth at the front of the theater. The 4-year-old falls and starts to cry. The parent doesn't bother to get up. My friend finally went to console the child after a few minutes. The mother never bothered to get up. Young me saw a mom on the train smack her kid for not sitting down, then smack him again for crying, then smack him again. These weren't light pats either. What young me saw next still gives me a justice boner. A fairly grizzled non-com opposite the woman put his book aside, stood up, and yanked her out of her seat by the front of her shirt. He held her there, legs dangling, and said, rough translation, if you do that again, I'll show you how it feels to be slapped around by someone much stronger and a lot meaner than you. Sit down. He then tossed her back in her seat, picked up his book, and kept on reading. I have a friend who's always had trouble sleeping. When she was young and didn't want to go to bed, her mother would tell her she'd die if she didn't go to sleep. So she'd desperately try to go to sleep, but would be kept awake by her fear of not falling asleep. That's horrible. I hate bringing up death as a threat when in talking to kids, but sometimes it's the only way you can get the seriousness of a situation across. Like warning a kid that if they wander into the street they could get hit by a car and die. May sound bad, but it keeps them from playing in the street and keeps a lot of people, not just the child, safe. When I was a cashier, this mom came in with her son's piggy bank. The kid was with her and must have only been about 6 years old. He wanted to buy a candy bar with his money, but the mom told him no, that his money was going to help support the family. She then proceeded to buy a 6-pack of beer and some cigarettes with the money while the kid watched. The poor boy had tears in his eyes the whole time. I refused service to her, and the manager ended up ringing her up. She was paying with mostly pennies and nickels, and while she was distracted I saw the boy walk over to the candy rack and wipe the tears from his eyes. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me it had taken him 3 years to save that money, but his mom didn't have a job, so she took it from him. I bought him the candy bar he wanted and gave him a bunch of quarters for the gumball/toy machines. His mom saw him trying to get one of those sticky hands from the machine and then took all the quarters he had from him. FCK that lady. I worked in retail for many years. I seen a lot of stupid stuff and even more related to kid/parenting, but there were 2 that came to mind. First was a girl and her dad coming in to return a CD she purchased. At the time, not sure if it's still the same. The policy was CDs, DVDs as well could only be exchanged for the same title when defective due to copyright and the ease of pirating it. The guy at customer service explained the policy, apologized, etc. Dad turns to the girl who is 9 to 10 and just gets in her face in a complete yell, telling her she should have read the policy before opening it and needed to know what the frick she was buying, and just screaming nearly incoherently until this girl was immediately in tears. The guy at customer service told the guy to shoot up and stop yelling at her. The guy turned to him and started to yell at him. He later said he figured a guy with that temper would turn it on him, and at least he spared the girl more verbal abuse. In the end, due to all the yelling and the fact it was a CD, our manager made an exception, let them exchange it, etc. The second one is quite a bit worse. We were remodeling the store, moving the car audio department to a new location, which meant after the store closed a bunch of us would stay overnight, move shelves, product, etc. The third night we were doing this around 11:30 or so. A little kid no more than 7 to 8 walks out rubbing his eyes like he just woke up. Sees us, starts screaming. Then another kid 11 to 12 maybe comes running out from behind a box in appliances. At first we just thought they fell asleep, so we called the police. When the 2 kids saw the police they started crying and explaining how their mom and her boyfriend had hid them there, and they were supposed to open the side door when the clock shows 12. They bring out a wristwatch with the alarm set for midnight. The cops had us all move our cars to the side of the building so they were not visible from the street, and well, when the parents knocked, it wasn't their kids that opened the door. Standing outside a supermarket a couple of years back, a woman walks out, toddler in a pushchair, a kid who might have been about 7 or 8 walking maybe 5 feet behind her. The older kid had a small rubber ball and was bouncing it on the ground and catching it. He seemed perfectly happy. It wasn't making any noise or bouncing around or anything. It wasn't bothering anyone. He was just bouncing and catching his ball as he walked. The woman, I assume it was his mom, noticed this after a minute, spun around and grabbed him hard by the upper arm, and then shouted right into his face, "If you keep bouncing that freaking ball, I'm going to smash your fucking face in." Shook him hard once, and then just turned around and walked on with the pushchair. The poor kid just looked so emptied. Like he wasn't even allowed this one small pleasure. It doesn't matter how annoying you find it when your kid bounces a ball. That's just never an okay thing to say to your child. Edit to at, this wasn't in a parking lot. It was in a pedestrianized plaza area out front, small in a city supermarket next to a library and other stores. There was no traffic, and it wasn't crowded. I used to work on a pediatric cancer floor. We had a little girl who was dying. Make-A-Wish gave her a Disney cruise. She was so excited to go. She talked about it for weeks. The week she was supposed to be on the cruise, she was admitted to the unit with a fever. We were all like, what happened to the cruise? It took a while, but we eventually learned the truth when her grandmother told us what happened. Her parents took the spending money they got and went on a all-night partying binge the night before and were wasted and passed out. When it came time to drive to the cruise ship, we could not even look at them ever again when they were there. And yes, we got DCF involved. I was waiting in the vehicle while my wife ran into a grocery store to grab a few things. A woman comes out with 3 young kids under the age of 8. Were both parked right next to a place to put your shopping cart, but she leaves it between the noses of our vehicles. None of the kids are old/big enough to sit up front, but one does without a seatbelt. Another kid in back doesn't appear to be wearing a seatbelt, and the third kid is just standing and holding on to the front 2 seats while the woman drives off. My wife comes out and starts telling me about a woman with 3 kids who were acting unruly and cursing a bunch. Then I tell her my story. It was the same woman. I have a friend of a friend who has a couple kids, one having cerebral palsy. Anyways, we were all at my cousin's one night drinking and playing Rock Band while the kids danced around and did kid stuff. Some way or another, the mother of the kids saw a car drive by slow and thought she recognized them as someone who owed her money or whatever and decided to tear off after them. I come out of the bathroom having heard all the commotion and all the adults were gone chasing after whoever it was. So now I'm stuck with like 5 kids. I'm drunk and tired as hell. I threw Rock Band back on and gave all the kids instruments. Had to unplug a couple, but we still managed to make it through the next 20 minutes or so. The CP kid ended up being pretty good at drums though. I was at a family reunion a few years back. Me and my friend who we brought along decided to go swimming in the hotel pool. We were swimming, and this little girl tried playing with us, so we played with her. After a while my friend told me I don't think anyone is watching her, so we asked her, and she said no. This girl said she was 5 and she was with her brothers. I went to the front desk and told them there is a little girl unsupervised in the pool and told them her name, and they called the family. We waited with the girl for a few hours and even fed her. Finally someone did come and get her. I remember this exactly. Are you Paul's kids? The man said, and they responded with a yes, and they left. The sad part is the dad couldn't be bothered to watch or come get his 5-year-old kid and her like 8-year-old brothers.